Hello. Before we begin, I'm the storyteller. Let us know what time it is on your end and where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe. My grandmother told me a scary bedtime story. Years later, I found out that the story she told me was horrifyingly true. I watched from a distance while my grandma and grandpa fished on their lake in the backyard. But one thing confused me. While grandpa cast his line and watched his rod, waiting for the anticipating tug of a fish, grandma's gaze remained fixed across the lake, her head tilted intently towards the dark fringe of woods. I never saw her look at the bobbing lures. She didn't even seem interested in fishing at all. I thought that maybe she just simply enjoyed looking at the trees. But a nagging feeling persisted. There was more to her gaze than a simple love for nature. It was summer break, and I decided to spend it at my grandparents' house in Knoxville, Tennessee. They lived in a 2-story house, recently built in 2018. It connected directly to a lake, with a dock jutting out on the far right side where my grandpa kept his bass boat. My grandparents were a sweet and quiet couple. They kept to themselves most of the time, living a peaceful life in their little corner of the world. Every summer, though, my visits became a tradition. Grandma's invitation was always an automatic yes, her warm smile and gentle voice a beacon calling me back. There were countless things to love about my grandma, her kindness and generosity at the top of the list. If I wanted something, it was usually an automatic yes from her too. But one of the things I truly cherished most was her stories. Unlike Grandpa, who mostly stuck to tales of his time in the military, exciting stories filled with bravery and adventure, of course, Grandma was a bottomless well of stories. Whether it was a funny story from her childhood, a heartwarming story about a kind neighbor, or a fantastical bedtime story that transported me to magical lands, Grandma always had one on hand. She was one of those special grandmas who could weave a story from thin air, her words painting vivid pictures in my mind. Grandpa, on the other hand, was a man of few words. A quiet strength emanated from him, and the stories he did tell were always about his service. He'd talk about the places he'd been, the challenges he'd faced, and the lessons he'd learned. While not as fantastical as Grandma's stories, they held a different kind of magic, a testament to his resilience and the experiences that shaped him. One of the things I always admired about Grandpa was his outdoor skills. He'd tell me most of his knowledge came from his military training, jokingly saying they prepared him for anything. He was a true outdoorsman, the kind of person I'd trust implicitly if we were ever lost in the wilderness. He knew everything about fishing, the best spots on the lake, the best techniques to catch different types of fish. Some of my favorite memories were spent on his boat, cutting through the cool morning water, the sun rising over the horizon, and the gentle hum of the motor, a comforting lullaby. Every night, Grandma dipped into her seemingly endless well of stories. I never quite understood how she did it. Her mind was like a sprawling library, shelves overflowing with stories to tell. One night, she'd tell me a story of brave knights seeking vengeance, their swords gleaming in the sun. Another night, she'd tell me a story of a land shimmering with magic spells and cursed lands. Then there were the scary stories. Now, Grandma usually avoided them. She knew how they affected me. But the thing about those stories was the detail. Oh man, the detail. They were so vivid, so real. It felt like I was peeking through a crack into another world. A world where the monsters and creatures she described lurked. A world so terrifying that I felt like falling through that crack would kill me. Every night was the same routine. Nestled under a patchwork quilt in the guest room, I'd wait with bated breath. The soft click of the doorknob was my cue. Grandma, her face etched with a lifetime of stories, would enter, a gentle smile gracing her lips. She'd pull up a rocking chair, its rhythmic creak adding to the lullaby effect. Then, in a warm voice, she'd begin telling me a story. One night, though, tucked under the patchwork quilt, I waited for Grandma's nightly visit. "Tea." The soft click of the doorknob announced her arrival. "Ready for another story?" she asked, her voice a warm rumble. I nodded eagerly. Nights at Grandma's were journeys to magical lands, each story more thrilling than the last. But tonight, I crave a different kind of story, a different kind of excitement. Can you tell me a scary story tonight, Grandma? I blurted out. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, followed by a thoughtful pause. Unlike her usual repertoire of action-packed adventures, her stories have always steered clear of scary ones. She sat beside me on the patchwork quilt, her usual mischievous eyes replaced by a thoughtful gaze. Her eyes flickered towards the window for a moment before returning to me. Then, with a gentle smile, she began. "Those woods outside your window," she started, her voice a warm rumble. I instinctively glanced towards the window, the familiar silhouette of the trees, outlined across the lake. "There's something in those woods," she continued, her voice dropping to a hushed whisper. A shiver danced down my spine, though the room remained pleasantly warm. Those simple words made me so uncomfortable that I was tempted to just tell Grandma to stop. But the truth was, I was hooked. Grandma did tell me scary stories on rare occasions, but they were always fictional, completely disconnected from the real world. She continued, "Every 7 years, it comes out of those woods. It emerges a creature that's been on this earth for thousands of years. It crawls on all fours. It hunts, a silent predator searching for its prey." I began to tense up a little. The room remained quiet, but the air felt heavy. "Its body is like a man, but twisted and contorted," she murmured, "and its limbs elongated, reaching out at odd angles. Its skin is black as coal, making it difficult to spot during the night." I swallowed hard, my eyes instinctively drawn back to the window. The trees, once comforting, now seemed to writhe with unseen shadows. "But the worst part," she continued, her voice barely a tremor, "is its eyes, multiple eyes, scattered across its head like a spider. They pierce the darkness, searching for an unsuspecting victim." She continued, her voice a hushed whisper, sending shivers down my spine. "Sometimes, if it has trouble finding prey, it ventures closer to houses, searching for unlocked windows." My breath caught in my throat. The image of eyes peering through the glass sent a jolt of terror through me. "If it finds an opening," she murmured, "it will crawl inside and snatch the closest person to it, dragging them back to the woods." I squeezed my eyes shut, the warmth of the quilt a poor barrier against the sudden chill. "It keeps its victims alive for 7 long years," she whispered, "feeding off them slowly until the hunger returns, and it's time to hunt once more." My grip tightened on the blanket, and my knuckles were white. A cold sweat was dripping down my skin. "But don't you worry," she said, her voice gentling. "As long as we keep the windows locked, we'll be safe. And don't forget to do the same at your mom's house." She rose from the quilt, her smile strained at the edges. A smile meant to reassure, but one that couldn't hide the sliver of unease in her eyes. Her movements seemed slow and deliberate as she walked towards the window. My eyes followed her, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. She stared out of the window for a moment, as if checking to make sure the thing wasn't around, and then she checked to make sure the window was locked. Just as she was about to turn away, I blurted out, unable to contain the question that had lodged itself in my throat. "Grandma, have you ever seen it?" She paused for a few moments, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face before a reassuring smile crept onto her lips. She didn't answer me. She simply leaned down and kissed my forehead, a gesture filled with a strange intensity. "Good night, darling," she whispered. Then, with a gentle click, she shut my door behind her. I was awake for most of that night, staring at the darkened window pane. The familiar silhouette of the woods outside now held a new kind of terror. I kept wondering if I would see that face my grandma described, a face with multiple eyes staring back at me. Eventually, exhausted from fear and lack of sleep, my eyelids drifted shut, and I finally drifted off. While I slept, I dreamed of its form shifting and writhing in the darkness. I ran, my legs pumping, but it was like I was running on ice. Panic seized me as the figure lunged, its long arms wrapping around my legs. It dragged me, a rag doll, through the grass, the stench of damp grass filling my nostrils. The woods grew bigger as the thing dragged me there, its jagged edges threatening to devour me whole. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Just as the branches of the trees were about to engulf me, I jolted awake, gasping for breath. Light streamed through the window, painting familiar shapes on the ceiling. The room held a peaceful stillness. It took several deep breaths to slow the pounding of my heart. Relief washed over me, chasing away the lingering dread. Since that night, despite Grandma's steady stream of new stories, the creature in the woods has remained a constant shadow in the corner of my mind. Thankfully, the nightmares, those terrifying chases through endless woods, didn't last. Slowly, the story faded from memory. A few years later, a different kind of darkness descended upon our family. Cancer, a cruel, selfish thief, stole my grandmother's health bit by bit. She fought for months, but in the end, the disease won. It left a hole in our lives, especially for Grandpa. Now, he lives alone, the silence of the house heavy with her absence. Talking about her seems to bring a fresh wave of pain, etched deep into the lines on his face. Sometimes, he murmurs about just waiting for his turn to join her. It's a heartbreaking sight. A man transformed into a solitary figure, simply waiting to die. That year was a blur of grief, a dark tunnel we all had to navigate. But with the love and support of family and friends, we eventually managed to pull through. With each passing year, the grief lessened, but Grandma's memory remained. Then, after another few years, during my senior year in high school, something happened. I walked into the house after a long day. The familiar scent of an empty house greeted me. Mom had already left for work. Pulling my backpack onto my bed, I pulled out my books and settled in for an evening of homework, studying, and the occasional break to watch TV. I shut off the TV, changed into my pajamas, and crawled into bed. Sleep, however, remained elusive. My mind was a tangled mess, tossing and turning over the events of the day. Finally, I peeked at the clock on my desk, its green glow reading almost 3 a.m. Just then, a sound shattered the silence, a sharp tap that echoed through the room. My eyes flew open, snapping towards the window. A wave of ice washed over me, freezing my blood solid. Memories of Grandma's story flooded back. The creature, the woods. There, pressed against the glass, was a form that blocked most of the moonlight from filtering in. If not for the sliver of moonlight peeking in around what was blocking it, I wouldn't have been able to see it at all. Its human-shaped body pressed against the window, and across its head, I could have sworn I saw movement. A flicker, like multiple tiny insects scurrying across its flesh. Then, a horrifying realization dawned on me. They weren't insects. They were eyelids. Eyelids flickering open and shut, scanning my room with frantic urgency. My breath hitched. Was this a dream? Just then, a shadowy limb, long and impossibly thin, snaked out towards the base of my window. Had I locked the window? The sickening sound of the window, as the glass began to slide up, hit my ears. Terror choked and screamed in my throat. There are woods behind my mom's house, too, and a sickening realization dawned on me. This wasn't just a story. It was real, and it was here. Adrenaline surged through me, and my flight or fight responses kicked in. I threw myself out of bed in a desperate scramble. My feet pounded the floor as I bolted towards the door, flinging it open, but my escape was cut short. The door slammed shut in my face, the force of it throwing me backward. A strangled cry escaped my lips as a wave of terror washed over me. My body locked up, and every muscle seized in a silent scream. Somehow it was now in my room, that fast it was no longer at the window. It was now above me, above my door. One of its grotesquely long limbs, tipped with a hand like a spider's claw, pressed firmly against the door, pinning me inside. Another seemed contorted at an unnatural angle, its fingers splayed against the wall in a grotesque parody of a grip. The head, if you could call it that, twisted on its neck in a way that defied human anatomy, almost spinning completely around. A chorus of eyes locked onto me. Trapped and alone, I stumbled back, my mind scrambling for any flicker of hope. The second floor was an escape route, but a leap out the window would likely result in injury, leaving me in a vulnerable position. Besides, that's where it probably wanted me. Right next to the door stood my wooden baseball bat. In a desperate lunge, I grabbed it, the wood rough against my grip. With a yell, I swung the bat with all my strength, connecting with a sickening thud. Splinters of wood rained down as the impact sent a tremor through the room. The creature recoiled slightly, its multiple eyes flickering in what might have been surprise. But the silence that followed was the most unsettling part. No roar of pain, no growl. This thing moved with an unnatural quiet. Even as it moved, it made no noise. It descended to the floor, its grotesque form dwarfing the space in my room. As it loomed closer, lowering its body in a predatory crouch, I swung the mangled bat wildly. The bat connected, with a bone-crunching impact, sending more shards of wood flying through the air. The creature recoiled, its grotesque form momentarily faltering. Seizing my chance, I bolted past the thing, flung open the bedroom door, and slammed it shut behind me with a resounding bang. Adrenaline pumping, I raced down the stairs, each step echoing in the sudden silence. Reaching the living room, I fumbled for the light switch, illuminating the space with a warm glow. Panting, I gripped the broken bat like a lifeline. Its splintered end pointed towards the top of the stairs, towards the thing in my room. Suddenly, a new sound pierced the tense silence. The creak of the front door opening. A silhouette emerged from the doorway, the dim porch light casting long shadows across her face. There you are. My mom's voice, laced with exhaustion. What the hell are you? The sentence died on her lips, completely cut short. Her eyes widened, but neither she nor I had time to react. In a sharp and quick moment, a shadowy, distorted limb, tipped with a spidery claw, shot out, wrapping around my mother's waist. It snagged her, sinking its talons deep into her flesh, a sickening tear echoing in the sudden silence. A strangled noise bubbled in her throat, cut short before it could form a scream. But then, I heard her scream fully formed as the thing dragged her away to the woods. I ran with all my effort, but the thing was fast, too fast. All I could do was keep running, watching, as my mom screamed with her arms folded around the creature's arm in a desperate attempt to escape. It had her, though, exactly where it wanted her, out in the open. I fell face first into the grass, a sob wrenching its way out of my chest. Warm tears streamed down my face, blurring my vision as I watched in horror. Mom's screams turned into blood-curdling shrieks, fading into a horrifying silence, as they disappeared into the indistinguishable maw of the woods. The police came, but what could they do? What could I tell them? I told them exactly what I saw. They looked at me like I was crazy, but what else could I say? For hours, I sat in a sterile interrogation room, the harsh overhead light blurring my vision. They questioned me over and over, dissecting my story, searching for inconsistencies. But all I could do was repeat the horrifying scene, my voice cracking with each retelling. There was no evidence to tie me to my mom's disappearance, nothing but my frantic pleas and the raw terror etched onto my face. Finally, they seemed to reach a reluctant roadblock. With a sigh and a dismissive glance, they released me. Now, a search party combs the backyard, venturing into the dense woods behind our house. Bloodhounds sniff the damp earth, their mournful howls echoing through the trees. In my room, the silence pressing down on me like a physical weight. As the harsh light of dawn breaks, I stare at the window. A large handprint, a grotesque, splayed imprint of multiple fingers, clings to the outside of the glass. A cold realization settles over me. Now I know that at least one of my grandma's stories is real. My brother didn't leave his room for 3 days. My parents wouldn't let me check on him. On the third night, Jacob didn't come out of his room. I got the courage to bring it up to Mom. People don't sleep for this long, I said. She was cooking a casserole, the 6th one this week. We were running out of fridge space for the leftovers, but she kept making more. I would watch her from the corner of the kitchen, her posture curved and her newly grayed hair hanging over the food. I walked over and tugged at her sleeve, but she didn't respond. She was slathering butter on the top crust. Mom, I said, did you hear me? He needs his strength, she said. We can't be bothering him. Before I could say anything, Dad walked in. His eyes were red and swollen, but he was smiling. He had 3 cans of Coke in his hands. I'm starving, he said. I still have the taste of that horrible cafeteria food in my mouth. You would think hospitals had good food for how much money they make, Mom said. I know, right? Dad said. He placed the Cokes on the counter. Mom didn't want us to go near Jacob's room, but I was getting worried. I peered out from the kitchen. His room hung at the end of the hallway like an abandoned lighthouse, the only sign of life being the New York Yankees poster taped to his door. Near the ground, there was a small sliver of space to see if he had turned on his lights. It was still dark, as it had been for the last 3 days. I turned back to Mom. Shouldn't we check on him? I asked. I don't know why places like Wendy's or Burger King don't put up little shops in hospital, Dad went on. I mean, you have hundreds of people who are stuck there for days on end. That's consistent business. It's all politics, Mom said. They sign these big contracts that are impossible to break. Right. That makes sense. Right. Dad was standing next to Mom now, his face inches from the casserole. He took a long sniff. He said. Smells great. Do you want some of the leftovers while this finishes in the oven? She asked. I think we still have some from yesterday. Wasn't the spinach and ricotta one good? Very good. Very, very good, he said. I couldn't stop eating it. Jacob's gonna devour these when he gets the appetite, Mom said. I turned back and took a step into the hallway. The distance between me and his room felt long and narrow, like a high wire. When I got away from the casserole smell, I hit a different smell. It reminded me of old Jim's socks. Even with Mom's array of candles and incense, I still smelled it. It cut through everything. The last time I saw Jacob was on the drive home from his treatment. His face was a pale green, and his eyes kept rolling back. Mom said I had to keep talking to him, to keep his focus. I told him about my friends from school, and how they keep pranking the teacher by putting tacks on her chair. It wasn't true. I saw it on a TV show once, but I was running out of material. It didn't matter, though. Jacob didn't even respond. All he did was cough. Pink drool was spilling onto his t-shirt. Danny, Mom said, why don't you heat up some of those leftovers? We're all craving that spinach and ricotta casserole. I can't stop thinking about it, Dad said. I was dreaming about it last night. I ignored them. I kept my focus on my brother's door. I didn't dream about the casserole like Dad. I kept having a different dream. My brother was running into my room and flicking my ear. It was a game we used to play. We would tiptoe up to the other's door, then wait for a moment. Then, the attacker ran in and got 1 or 2 good flicks before retreating. In my dream, though, Jacob would run in and flick me, but I wouldn't move. I just stood there. He would flick and laugh, then flick some more. Sometimes, he would flick so hard my ear flew off. Earth to Danny, Dad said, snapping his fingers in my face. He was standing in front of me, blocking my view of Jacob's door. Do you mind heating up 4 portions of the casserole in case Jacob wants some? We're going to eat that before this next casserole because we want to make sure Jacob's able to try it because, in my opinion, it was definitely one of your mom's best. I looked up at him and held my eye contact. I couldn't say what I was thinking, so I wanted Dad to feel it. Maybe if I stared long enough, my feelings would translate. But Dad looked at me for only a moment, then away. In that brief connection, though, I saw something I didn't want to see. It was like staring down the tunnel of the world's deepest well. Come on now, he said. He grabbed my shoulders and turned me around. His voice got heavier. You're going to want to heat up each piece individually because if you do them all at once, then you won't get even heat through the pieces, and you'll probably have a couple that are too hot and others that are too cold, and then Jacob won't get the full picture of how good these casseroles are. Dad let go of my shoulders and walked ahead of me, but I stayed in the hallway a moment longer. I turned to look at my brother's door one last time. I fantasized about walking up to it and going inside, but I was afraid Mom would yell at me. Besides, I never liked going in there. He had a puke bucket next to his bed which always had pink splatters in it, and there were always clumps of hair on his pillows. Back before the last hospital visit, Mom would make me go in there and talk to him, but I always made up some excuse like I had a cold and didn't want to get him sick. When I couldn't get out of it, I would stay in there for a few minutes and watch him try to breathe. I would tell him about some TV episode one saw, then run back to my room. I looked up. I thought I was walking back to the kitchen, but I was moving toward the door. I didn't want to, but I kept moving, like my limbs were controlled by a puppeteer. I put my hand on the doorknob. I turned. The gym sock smell filled my head like helium. Through the darkness, I could make out a sliver of my brother's face. The soft evening light fell on him. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. His arms were straight as rulers, and his fingers curled like a blooming rose. I walked aside of his bed. Red spit fell off his lips. He looked like a frowning clown. I flicked his ear. It was hard. I walked out and closed the door behind me. As I walked back, I seemed to forget what the inside of his room looked like. With the door closed, it could be anything. Jacob could be doing jumping jacks, or reading comic books, or plotting his next ear flick attack. When I walked into the kitchen, I heated up 4 plates of spinach and ricotta casserole. When they were done, I wrapped Jacob's plate in aluminum foil and put in the oven to keep warm. Then, Mom, Dad, and I sat in the dining room and ate in silence. My brother's imaginary friend. I was 10 to 11 years old when this started. My brother was 4 to 5. Like most kids, Kyle too had an imaginary friend. And like most kids with imaginary friends, Kyle had given his a name with distinctive physical features. If I remember correctly, the friend's name was Bosco. Bosco was short, pudgy, and had a gray beard. My parents thought it was a bit strange that Kyle's imaginary friend would be an adult man, but they didn't dwell on it too much. Bosco quickly became a part of our daily routine. While getting ready for school, Kyle would insist that I needed to stop hogging the mirror, as Bosco had to fix his hair and beard at breakfast and lunch and dinner. The chair next to Kyle was to be left unoccupied because that's where Bosco would sit. My parents were just grateful that he didn't ask for an extra platter to be prepared, as Bosco did not eat. He just wanted to sit there to keep Kyle company. Bosco would make his presence felt at school too. Kyle's teacher once called my mom how impressed she was with Kyle's quickly expanding vocabulary. He was learning new words, and when asked, he would say his friend Bosco had said them to him. I remember this one instance when a new family moved into our neighborhood. Their kid was Kyle's age. Mom took us over to say hello to them. I remember Kyle shook the other kid's hand and said rather clearly, "I'm very pleased to make your acquaintance." The other kid just stared. My mom struggled not to look smug. My dad wasn't all that interested in Kyle's friend, or in anything else his kids did for that matter. So it was mostly my mom and I who got to hear about how nice and fantabulous Bosco was. Then came the incident that made us rethink just how imaginary Bosco really was. One day, Kyle and I were waiting at the bus stop just outside of school for Mom to pick us up. This place always had a lot of parents and kids around, so it was safe. Suddenly, Kyle began pulling on my arm, telling me he wanted to go to the store across the street and get a candy bar. I told him we could get one when Mom got there, but he just wouldn't listen. He pulled on my arm almost frantically and kept saying he needed a candy bar now. I gave in and walked with him to the store, all the while telling him if Mom got mad at us, it would be his fault. The moment we had crossed the street, the driver of a bus lost control of the vehicle and mowed down a bunch of people at the bus stop. It was like a scene from a movie. I was in a state of shock while Kyle started crying. When my mom got there, she hugged us for what seemed like an eternity. She knew we could have been among the people who were crushed. Once we had gotten home and had calmed down, she asked me why we had crossed the street. I told her about Kyle wanting a candy bar. She questioned Kyle, who told her he didn't really want a candy bar. Bosco did. And he's the one who told Kyle to get me to go to the store with him. My mom turned pale. For some time after that, life went on as usual. Mom now asked Kyle about Bosco quite regularly. But he didn't say anything out of the ordinary, just regular kid stuff. But another surprise for us was right around the corner. My mom's sister, our Aunt Rita, had just moved to our town. She had landed a job at the same company where Dad worked. And I remember that she and my dad got along very well. One weekend, my mom took us to see our maternal grandparents. Dad said he couldn't come as he had work. Mom seemed disappointed, but agreed to take us without him. Nana and Papa too were impressed at how articulate Kyle was becoming, and listened with great interest about his new friend Bosco. The next afternoon, we were all sitting in the living room. I was playing with my grandparents' dog. Mom and her parents were talking while Kyle was fiddling with the TV remote. He switched to a channel where the movie Ghost was playing. The famous pottery scene, you know which one, was on. Mom instantly grabbed the remote and changed the channel to Cartoon Network. Kyle was upset. He demanded to know why he couldn't watch the movie. Mom explained to him that he could watch it when he was older and that it wasn't appropriate for kids to watch grown-ups hug each other like that. Kyle argued some more, and Mom again told him he wasn't old enough. He pouted and in sheer exasperation asked why it was okay for Dad and Aunt Rita to hug like that in his bed. Mom was taken aback and asked what he was talking about. Kyle told her that Dad and Aunt Rita would get naked and hug in his bed, just like in a movie, when we were at school and Mom was at work. Once or twice a week, Dad would come home for a while and he and Aunt Rita would hug in Kyle's bed, and then get dressed and leave. Mom was outraged and asked why he was making up such a disgusting story. Kyle insisted that he didn't make it up. Bosco had told him. Bosco also said that Aunt Rita was hugging Dad right then, even as they spoke. Mom's gaze turned cold. She told our grandparents she was going home. She drove back to our house in a hurry. I deduced that Aunt Rita really was there because Mom came back later that night with more of her stuff and said that we'd be staying with Nana and Papa for a while. My parents were divorced by the end of that year. When I was 23, I took a job as a night auditor at a mid-sized hotel just off the interstate in rural Ohio. It wasn't my dream job, but the pay was surprisingly good for what amounted to sitting at a front desk from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., processing the day's transactions and checking in the occasional late arrival. Most nights, I had the entire lobby to myself, which I actually preferred. I could listen to podcasts, work on my laptop, and the hours would pass relatively quickly. The hotel itself was one of those generic 3-story buildings you'd pass 100 times without remembering. Beige exterior, interior hallways with patterned carpet that probably hadn't been changed since the 90s, and that particular smell that all hotels seem to have, a mix of industrial cleaner and recycled air. During my shift, the only other employee in the building was usually the maintenance guy, whoever was on call that week, and they typically stayed in the back rooms unless something broke. I'd been working there about 6 weeks when I first noticed Marcus. He was a guest who checked in one Tuesday evening, just before my shift started. I saw his name in the system when I came on. Marcus Wendell, room 237, staying for a week. Business traveler, it said in the notes. Prepaid corporate rate. Nothing unusual. The first time I actually saw him was around 1 a.m. that night. I was behind the desk doing some data entry when I heard the elevator chime. I looked up and saw a man in his late 30s, average height, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt that looked like he'd been wearing it all day. He had thin-framed glasses and brown hair that was receding slightly at the temples. Completely unremarkable. He walked up to the desk and smiled. Hey, couldn't sleep. Any chance there's still coffee? I told him the lobby coffee station shut down at 10, but I could make him a fresh pot if he wanted. He said that would be great and sat down in one of the lobby chairs while I started a new brew. While the coffee maker hissed and gurgled, I could feel him watching me. Not in an obvious way, but I'd glance up occasionally and catch him looking before he turned his attention to his phone. When the coffee was ready, I brought him a cup. He thanked me. We made small talk about the weather and how dead the interstate was at this hour, and then he went back upstairs. The whole interaction lasted maybe 10 minutes. Normal enough. But then it happened again the next night. Same time, almost to the minute. The elevator chimed at 1:03 a.m., and there was Marcus, wearing different clothes but the same polite smile. Couldn't sleep again, he said. Insomnia's been bad lately. I made him coffee, we chatted briefly, and he went back upstairs. The conversation was pleasant enough, but something about the timing felt off. Exactly the same time, 2 nights in a row. The third night, I told myself I was being paranoid. But sure enough, 1:03 a.m., the elevator opened. This time Marcus didn't even mention not being able to sleep. He just walked up to the desk and said, the usual, like we had some kind of routine established. I made the coffee, but this time I paid closer attention during our conversation. He asked me questions, where I was from, how long I worked there if I lived nearby. Normal small talk on the surface, but he seemed to be cataloging my answers. When I mentioned I was originally from Cleveland, he immediately asked what neighborhood, what high school I'd gone to, if my family was still there. The questions came fast, one after another, and I started giving vaguer answers. After he left that night, I pulled up his reservation again. Corporate rate, company name listed as Wendell Consulting LLC. I Googled it. Nothing came up. I tried his name with various search terms. Also nothing. In this day and age, most people have at least some kind of digital footprint, but Marcus Wendell seemed to barely exist online. The fourth night, I decided to do some data entry in the back office instead of at the front desk, hoping he wouldn't come down if he didn't see me there. At 1:03 a.m. exactly, I heard the elevator through the office door. I stayed quiet, watching the security monitor that showed the lobby. Marcus stood by the front desk for a moment, looking around. Then he walked to the back office door and knocked. "Hello. I know you're in there. I saw you go in earlier." My stomach dropped. I hadn't seen him in the lobby at all during my shift, which meant he'd been watching the security cameras. Guests didn't have access to those. I opened the door, trying to keep my voice steady, and asked if he needed something. "Just wanted my coffee," he said. That same polite smile, but now it looked wrong somehow. Too practiced. I told him I was busy with paperwork and couldn't make coffee right then. He stood there for a long moment, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something sharp and medicinal. Then he said, "That's okay. Tomorrow night works." He went back upstairs, and I immediately called my manager, leaving a voicemail about the situation. I said I was uncomfortable with this guest's behavior and asked if someone could be on call nearby for the rest of his stay. My manager called back the next morning and told me I was overreacting, that business travelers got lonely, and that talking to the front desk was normal. He said Marcus hadn't done anything wrong and that I needed to provide better customer service. The fifth night, I brought my boyfriend, Tyler, to sit with me during the shift. Hotel policy technically didn't allow it, but I didn't care anymore. I told him everything, and while he agreed it was weird, he tried to reassure me that the guy probably was just lonely and awkward. 1:03 a.m. The elevator. Marcus stepped out, saw Tyler sitting in the lobby chair, and his expression changed. Not angry exactly, but something cooler. Calculating. He walked up to the desk and said, "I see you have company tonight." "This is my boyfriend," I said, making sure my voice was clear. "Tyler," Marcus said, which made both of us freeze. I had never mentioned Tyler's name. "I'm Marcus. Nice to finally meet you." Tyler stood up, and I could see him tense. "How do you know my name?" Marcus tilted his head slightly. "You're listed as her emergency contact in the hotel employee directory. I was looking at the board in the back hallway earlier. Just curious who worked here. Employees weren't supposed to have access to that area. And even if someone did want her back there, why would they be looking at the employee emergency contact list?" Tyler moved closer to the desk, positioning himself between me and Marcus. "I think you should go back to your room," Tyler said, his voice low. Marcus smiled. "Of course. I can see I'm interrupting. Have a good night, both of you." He turned and walked back to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. Just before the doors closed, he looked directly at me and said, "See you tomorrow, Sarah." That was when real fear set in. Because I realized something I should have noticed earlier. I'd never told him my name. I didn't wear a name tag. It wasn't displayed anywhere at the front desk. Tyler stayed with me the rest of the shift, and when 7 a.m. came and the morning clerk arrived, we went straight to the manager's office. I told him I was done, that I wasn't coming back unless Marcus checked out immediately. The manager pulled up the reservation, and his face went pale. That's not possible," he muttered. "What?" Tyler asked. "Room 237. We don't have a room 237. This building only has 210 rooms. The numbers stop at 224. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. But I've been seeing his name in the system every night. I can show you the logs." The manager pulled up the guest records. Marcus Wendell's name was there, but when he clicked on it, the reservation details were corrupted, just strings of random characters. The room number field was blank. The payment information showed a credit card, but when they tried to pull up the transaction details, the system crashed. We went upstairs. I led them to where I'd seen Marcus get off the elevator every night, which would have been the second floor if room 237 existed. But the hallway only went up to room 224. There was just a wall where the next room would have been. The manager checked every security camera recording from the past week. The footage showed me at the front desk, showed me going to the back office, showed Tyler arriving on the fifth night. But it never showed Marcus. Not once. Not getting off the elevator. Not approaching the desk. Nothing. "You're saying I imagined him?" I asked, my voice shaking. Tyler saw him too. Tyler nodded emphatically. I heard him say her name. I saw him standing right there. But the camera showed only me and Tyler in the lobby that night. On the footage, I appeared to be talking to empty air, making coffee for no one. The manager suggested maybe I'd been falling asleep at the desk, experiencing very vivid dreams. He said the job could do that to people, that the isolation of night shifts could play tricks on your mind. He offered to move me to a day position, but I quit on the spot. For weeks afterward, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe there was a carbon monoxide leak affecting my perception. Maybe I had been falling asleep without realizing it. But Tyler had seen him too, had heard him say our names. We both remembered the same details, his glasses, his cologne, the exact timing of his appearances. 3 months later, I was working at a coffee shop in town when someone walked in who looked familiar. Same receding hairline, same thin frame glasses. My heart started pounding. He got in line, ordered a drink, and when the barista asked for a name, he said, Marcus. When he turned around with his coffee, he looked right at me. That same practice smile. He walked past me toward the door, and as he did, he said quietly, How's Tyler? I haven't seen him since, but I know he's still out there somewhere. Sometimes, I'll be at work or at home, and I'll get this feeling like someone's watching me. I'll check the time, and more often than not, it's 1:03. I don't know what Marcus wanted or what he was. I don't know if he was ever really at that hotel, or if something about those night shifts opened my mind to something that shouldn't be there. All I know is that I've never worked a night shift again, and I never will. Some things are worse than being afraid of what might happen. The worst fear is not knowing whether what already happened was even real, or whether it's still happening, and you just can't see it anymore.